Okay, well, we've got a quorum. So I think we can get started, folks. Hello. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mary Ann LeBlanc. This is the December 5th, 2017 meeting of the Finance and Warrant Commission. Good evening, everyone. Westwood Media Center is here. Thank you very much, and we grant you permission to tape the meeting. Is there anyone else who would like to tape the meeting? I see no affirmative responses. With that, if we could start, as we always do, with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great, thank you very much. So I hope everyone enjoyed the break following town meeting. And this is the one meeting, I think, of the year where we have nothing on the town warrant. So we actually have no official business to do, but it's a nice meeting that we have to delve into our ongoing issues. And the municipal subcommittee thought it would be a great idea to bring our fire chief, our new fire chief, Chief Deckers, welcome, and Chief Silva in to, first of all, so that we could meet Chief Deckers and get you familiar with our process and to get up to date on some of the public safety issues, which have always been very important to FinCom. The public safety of our residents is among the most important issues in our town. So we are very glad to have them, and Mike Gillette, of course, is with them as well. So with that, I'd love to welcome you gentlemen, if you'd like to sit up here at the table, and I'm going to hand the agenda off to Tom Kilgariff and Peter Lentz from the Municipal Subcommittee to start us off on a conversation with you. Thank you all for being here.
Well, welcome, guys, and welcome, Chief, to town. It's great to have you. So thank you, guys, for joining us tonight. And so Peter will be going over some things on the fire side, Chief, and I'll follow up with some things on the police side, Jeff, if we could. And basically, what we've got is just some follow-up stuff from some of the meetings we had last spring and all. And I'll kind of just start it off, and maybe you could just kind of take it from there. But there was obviously one of the things that really jumped out in some of the numbers that you'd provided last spring was the calls for service increase, which was significant. It was upwards of, I think, well, let's see, arrests were up 77%, and I think calls for service were up significantly as well. And so what we're trying to, I guess, if we could, is see what the impact of University Station was on those numbers specifically, because all the numbers were town numbers. So is that a possibility to be able to quantify some of that impact?
Sure. So a couple things. As you know, excitingly, we're in the new building, although it's done enough that we can be in it, but it's not done, as my son would say. So we're still working out some of the...
Thank you, Chief.
Oh, sure.
Just the camera picks it up.
Great. Okay, thank you. Unplugged here. Okay. We don't have all of the kind of same software up and running that we did to give you some nice graphical displays, so I just have some raw data in front of me, but this is something we've looked at a lot, so it's not something that I'm incapable of answering. I mean, essentially, of the significant growth in calls for service, somewhere upwards of 80% of it is from University Station. So there's a very little increase in numbers of calls for service in what I'll call the rest of town, both in the nature of the type of calls and in the volume. Largely a same. University Station has increased not only the volume of calls, but the type of calls that we get. Identity fraud calls exploded. That was a uncommon call for service, although as everyone knows, that can happen on the internet, while you're sitting in your living room. It happens in much more regularity when people's credit cards get scanned with, portable scanners as they're in a store shopping. Or we've attract all of these areas, not just us. They attract large commercial identity fraud groups that come. And so there was about a year ago, it was a pretty popular case. It was on the news. It was a state police, a Secret Service case. It was a car chase. It came into Westwood. We assisted. We got use out of the canine, and it was a group of people from Albania, I believe. So I mean, this is multinational people descending upon these large chain stores, Target and so forth. So those weren't calls that we got before. The residences that are there, that's a lot of people in the same place. Kind of a different mix of people, maybe not long-term residents. So, anytime you get a new group of housing units like that, there's some kind of adjustment period, right? So when you're on a residential street, people know their neighbors and they know one another, and there's just certain types of things that don't happen. But when you put lots of people, it's almost like the dorm room effect. You have a lot of neighbor disputes, or you'll have, different parties, or, people intermingling and that such. So a lot of disturbances there. Of course, the train station calls are always there. We get, but that didn't really change really. I mean, minimal increase from more residents at the apartments that had taken the train. Maybe a little uptick, but I'd say the identity fraud, the straight theft, the larceny. We had a handful of what we'd call an unarmed robbery, all attributable to University Station. And while the numbers are a significant increase from what we saw normally in town, it's important to frame that in the fact that it's not an unsafe place to be. It's not the type of thing where you don't want to go down there because, geez, wow, look at these numbers. They exploded. It's more a testament to our call volume was very, very low. I mean, we're fortunate. I mean, this is a community where we don't get a lot of crime-related calls for service. We get a lot of service calls, whether it's a car accident or, a coyote or a noise in the middle of the night or a suspicious car. But in terms of actual crimes in the resident kind of well-settled areas of town, very, very low. So, that's why it is a significant increase, but it's not something that, people need to be concerned about, like that's a real problem. It's
right. Is it so a function of higher volume of people in
right.
in a smaller area?
Absolutely.
Space and all.
Absolutely. And that the chief can talk about it, but that affects fire too, right? And so not only do we dispatch the calls jointly, we're attached at the hip, literally and figuratively. We respond to those calls too for obvious reasons. If someone has a chest pain or something else, we might be on patrol in the district. So we can get there faster, but we don't have the training or the equipment, so we need the firefighter paramedics to come. So, it doesn't just affect us, it affects them too. But certainly those type of calls have increased a lot. You have people walking around, you have people shopping, more people, more problems, in the sense that things just happen to people. And so those type of calls went up a lot too. Alarms, obviously, a lot of commercial buildings down there. Alarms come in for those buildings. That's a fairly significant drain on resources because, even though we have some fairly large properties in town, it takes a lot more officers to search Target than it does a residence, So, so that ties up resources. So we've seen a significant increase in those type of calls too.
Right, great, thank you. A couple of quick follow-ups on that, Chief. How did the actual increases of calls for service compared to what your forecasted impact studies were originally?
Yeah, I think, I don't think I know. It was a more of an impact than we expected. I wouldn't say night and day, but we knew that there would be an increase. But it's anybody who's been down to University Station, whether it's Black Friday or any other days, I mean, the Wegmans and Target, they have a robust population of people that go there. And so that's good. That's a good thing. But in terms of, impact on calls for service, it was a little more for sure than we thought. And as I've mentioned to the FinCom before, and the selectmen, other people. My philosophy on staffing as it relates to that has always been very conservative. I think that it's just more responsible fiscally for us to try to, do that in small pieces just to make sure that we kind of have a continuing trend. I wouldn't want to wait and have a particular busy holiday season and, say the sky's falling and, ask for a massive increase in staff only to see that diminish significantly, and now, the town is left with pay and benefits and retirement and so forth for officers.
Great, thank you. And one last, I think, University Station follow-up, Chief. One of the things you'd mentioned back in March was that 2017, early in the year, was the impact of University Station had really flattened out.
Mm-hmm.
So the increase obviously came from 14 to 15 and presumably 15 to 16. But so
Right.
that so as of the spring, things seem to have flattened out. Has that trend continued? Have things kind of found their level, or has it increased further?
No, I mean it's leveled off somewhat, and I think a lot of it too. It was not only an adjustment for us, but it was kind of an adjustment for those different properties. Like for some, particularly the residences and so forth. There was a lot of demand at first. We were getting called there all the time for a variety of things. I think once people became accustomed to what the norms were and what the expectations were of the town and of their fellow residents and of the police department, that started to level off some. Some of the enforcement efforts that we were taking down in that area, we pull people from all over. I mean, certainly we have Westwood residents that go down there, but we have people, they literally come from all over, Randolph, Brockton, you name it. And so we tried to be, as we always do, but down there in particular, we tried to be more, proactive with, getting out of the cruisers and interacting with the people and showing a visible presence and, taking action, enforcement action on motor vehicle stops, even if they didn't necessarily result in a ticket. We wanted to, interdict these people, if you will, and just kind of show that our presence was there to try to act as a crime prevention measure. We lost a couple of our younger officers to the state police. In policing, the younger officers kind of tend to be, they gravitate more towards motor vehicle related things, and I don't want to trivialize those because lots of police officers get hurt and killed with them, but it's relatively easy to operate radar and see if somebody's speeding, right? So for a newer officer, you often see the newer officers out there stopping cars for things like that. It's with more experience comes the officers who, can understand the value of kind of more of a community policing philosophy, or, well, this person's speeding, but it's a few miles over the speed limit. You can't stop everybody. And so some of the numbers also that we saw, our enforcement numbers that were higher, when you lose 2 young proactive police officers on a force of 30, let's say, over from the chief to the entry-level person, which means functionally you probably have about 18 patrol officers, so you lose 2 of them. That's a lot, particularly when they're doing a disparate amount of the enforcement. So I think the combination of that with just kind of the adjustment of the expectations caused it to level out some. But still those numbers, even, the year's not over, but it almost is, they're still significantly higher than, say, what they were, 3 years ago or something, exponentially higher.
Right. So we've talked a lot about University Station and its impact on the departments. And what other things happening in town that have been a real draw on your resources and staff time and personnel beyond University Station?
I think, one of the things that always drives staffing in a town like ours is that we're a service-related community, right? Where, when you call the police, you're not waiting 5, 6, 10, 12 minutes for a police car, right? So when we respond to everything literally from, a suspected burglar to a bat in the belfry. So, those type of service-related calls, they take time. We spend the time with people that we need to. And I think, that pays dividends. That's not only pays dividends in an exceedingly low crime rate and an exceedingly low rate of victimization, but a sense that people really feel safe. And that's a tougher number to measure. But, we become somewhat immune to it. But when you think about, the elementary school students that are walking to the various elementary schools. I mean, we have a walking community. There's lots of communities where, look, that just doesn't happen. And so, maintaining that level of police service to not only actually hit the bottom line but for crime rates, but to make people actually feel safe, two different things, that's a big draw for service. So that continues to occupy, a lot of our time.
Right. Great. Thank you. Moving a little bit over to some budgetary stuff. Any expenses that increase more than 10% from 2016 into this year that that might have additional concern on your part, or anything that you could tell us about that?
I mean, with the caveat that we're kind of at the, certainly not at the beginning, but maybe the midpoint at best with the kind of, in-town review with the board and so forth of what we did. No, I don't think so. I mean, there's always a number of variables, or at least a couple that are tough to quantify. I mean, when you have people leave for another job, you can't predict that, right? So, again, if we were a force of 200, it's a de minimis effect. When you're a force of 30 and 18 of them are on the road, it's a fairly significant effect. So things like that affect overtime. We continue, like all agencies, we'll have an officer or two go out injured, and by statute, police and fire come under a different form of injury coverage. It's not a workers' comp, it's a statutory remedy, which means that the officer or the firefighter is out, and then you have to replace that person because it's a public safety need, right? Whereas if we were another department, and maybe that staff person was going to paint the fence or do some other work, they could wait until someone came back to work, maybe it would be okay. We can't do that. We can't just roll up the shop and say, well, call the state police if you have a problem. We don't have anybody on the road. So, but other than that, no, nothing that we're still, we're going to have to try to get a feel for what the building costs mean. I mean, I would expect that those would go up somewhat in kind. I mean, significantly larger facility, but also significantly more energy efficient. So, I don't know if if it's a 2.5 times bigger building. I mean, I don't know the electricity is 2.5 times as much, but maybe it's 1.8 times as much. I mean, it certainly would be more, regardless of the level of efficiency. So, but we don't know what those are because, we've only been in it a month and a half. Otherwise, I would say, no, nothing really jumping off the page, really. There's some staffing, potential staffing concerns, but we kind of need to, talk through that. Kind of, myself, the fire chief, Mike, Pam, what's the goal? What's kind of the available money? Where do we see it? Where does the kind of prevailing priority lay? And, so we're not there yet. But obviously, if you increase, staff, then, that is the ability to, exceed, reach or exceed that 10% level. But that's, we're just not there yet, so I don't know.
Right. One other expense item. Back in the spring, you'd mentioned overtime forecasts of Westwood versus other similar towns, and I think the concern was that the OT forecasts were traditionally too low in Westwood, and that was on your radar as a concern. How is any developments there, or your thoughts there?
I've talked about that, worked on that with Mike and Pam a lot. I suspect that's going to be, I'm certain that that'll be part of kind of an ongoing dialogue that's happening right now. Again, it's a service community, and it's a department like fire where you need to staff people, and so it affects your budget very differently than a workers' comp. You're statutorily required to pay the injured employee 100% of his or her pay, and then you have to contractually fill it at time and a half. So it's, that's a significant, amount of outlay of money there. We lost some personnel. We had to hire some new personnel. They're on training. So not only are you down net two for the people you lose, but then the people that are training them really kind of become offline because they're training officers. So, you then have to hire around that. This is a contract negotiation year. So, with the hope that that settles, when that goes up, of course, that has a cascading effect on, rates of pay, holiday pay, college pay, and so forth. So that's something that we've talked about, and we've kind of managed that through if we spent under on some expenses or some other things. But I think, I don't know, I mean, Mike could probably speak to it, but certainly I think there's a cognizance that there's a lot of data out there of what that costs and what other towns do, and we're talking about it. So.
One last question for
Sure.
me, and then I'll turn it over to Peter and Chief Deckers. On the capital expenses side, any capital needs beyond 3 new vehicles for 2018 for your department, Chief?
I had a couple capital requests. What we've tried to do, like we did with the vehicles, is, rather than, trying to, subsidize things one time and then wait and then come back for another big purchase. We've tried to put things like the bulletproof vest, which is it's a small number. I think it's like $10,000, but we tried to put officers in a rotation so you don't have to replace 30 bulletproof vests all at once. So that's an item that's listed in there. There's a small amount for electronic control devices. Some people, I think, more commonly refer to that as a taser, but taser is really a brand. It's not a thing. It's an electronic control device, and taser is, got significant market penetration to the point that it's almost like the only thing that exists. So we did a lump sum purchase of those a couple years ago, and they have about a 5-year shelf life. I mean, you can get a little more out of them sometimes, but that's usually the budget point, 5 years. So I've tried to implement a rotation for that, so it's a small, manageable number. I mean, we've had fantastic success with those, and they've really kind of become the standard of care, frankly, for most law enforcement agencies. And kind of, as you may recall, we've kind of been through that exercise and talked about the other communities that do it. But it's a modern day tool for law enforcement. Which compared to what otherwise might be a very minimal evolution from a flintlock and a club from a caveman, it's a much safer, much more advanced, much more modern and controllable piece of equipment. So I think that might be like a $5,000 or $6,000 incremental item. They're not very large purchases in the scheme of potential capital pieces of equipment. We just replaced our fingerprint machine, which literally limped over the finish line until we got into the new building, which was okay. So we should be okay with that. So, yeah, no large capital items.
Great. Thank you very much.
Of course.
And actually, maybe at the tail end of Peter's questions, of the question for probably both chiefs would be regarding plans for a town in the event of a violent attack or some sort of event like that. But
Sure.
that's certainly, I'm sure, a sort of a combined type of response. So Peter.
Okay. Thanks, Chief, for coming in.
Oh, no problem at all.
And I didn't send you any questions beforehand, so you're flying blind here. So, but don't worry, this is not 60 Minutes or Meet the Press or anything like that. You can always get back to me. Just wondering, an update on Station 2. How has that gone? Any surprises? Is it working everything like you'd expected? Just any sort of update you could provide associated with that.
Well, being at my 35th day here, and 14 days beforehand, I'm still in the learning phase of everything going on. From what I've seen since we've occupied the building, we've had very few problems that are building specific, and we're moving through in the punch list that you will always have in any construction. Moving through the punch list and getting all that stuff taken care of right now. So, and that's moving along. Probably not as fast as some of us would like after, was it 28 months? But it is definitely progressing. Things are moving in the right direction. We're actually getting things accomplished.
Okay. As you'll see, University Station comes up a lot, and not only are those existing things, but new things are coming on, like the hotels come on and other things like that. Are you experiencing more activity associated with that?
Absolutely. Again, being very new at this, I've started pulling a lot of run data. It's not always as easy as I would like it to get it out of the system that we currently have, to really run those true numbers for you. But yes, there is an impact to that. And now the bigger impact for us right now is that the second phase is coming on board, which is going to require a lot more intensive plan review and that end of personnel time to invest in that location. But yes, our call volume is up. I mean, if you were just to listen to the scanner, we're down on University Ave all the time. We were down there this morning for a trash truck on fire behind LA Fitness. So, the pickup is there.
Okay. So you mentioned
Oh, I'm sorry, Lifetime Fitness.
So you mentioned getting into the numbers, and that's something that's advantageous for us to see is trends in different numbers. And so if you want, we could actually send you what we received last year, if that's any benefit to you.
I probably have it.
You probably have it,
Yeah, so, but
if-
you're more
if you
than
want
welcome to send it along, and if
okay.
I have it, great. If I don't, it will be perfect to put in with my current
Okay.
documents.
Yeah. One of the things that the chief was talking about last year is the assist that we do for other towns and things like that. And I don't know if that activity has gone up, stayed the same, is down. And once again, if this is not something you're aware of being
No,
new,
it's
that's fine.
pretty current. Everything stays about the same in that sense, because we are providing mutual aid to other communities, especially more ALS mutual aid. We're actually looking at entering into formal agreements with towns, so that that Westwood is not their primary provider for their ALS care. You know, we'll supplement what they need. Medfield is coming online with their own ALS in I think July, so that will help us in the sense that we won't be going there as frequently, because they'll have a full-time ALS service in place.
For those of us not on the municipal subcommittee, what does ALS stand for?
Oh, for advanced life support. That's the paramedic service.
Okay. I was just wondering, and this might be a question for really Mike too, is the timing of the East Street Bridge raising and starting that whole project, and how that potentially could impact you all as not being able to go through the train bridge there.
Well, the East Street Bridge is about ready to get started, and it'll officially start in the fall, late fall, but it'll really get underway in the spring. They're expecting a year and a half for a construction season and a half build out for that. The fire department, its trucks are all built to go under the bridge. I think it's Millis or Medway that Warrant Millis. It's Millis that Medway. It was Medway that didn't build their trucks to go under. So when the truck did hit, it wasn't us. It was them. We got blamed, but it wasn't us. But when it goes up, it'll go up by 13 and a half. It'll go up 13 and a half feet, which is around 2 feet higher. So our trucks will be able to be designed a little bit differently than they're currently designed. There won't be such a special fit. So I don't think that's going to really measurably change the level of service.
Okay. And in terms of capital plans, I know that trucks are always important, but the renovation of Station 1, how important is that, and timing-wise? Is that something for this year's budget? Is it going to be pushed out to later years? What's the status of that?
On vehicles themselves?
No, the renovation of Station 1.
Oh, Station 1. All right, so what we've decided to do is to hold a pause. The school department is about to hear whether or not its elementary school project, namely the Hanlon School project, is going to go forward. They've made a short list of of projects that are being considered. It's mid-December, they're supposed to hear if, in fact, that school department is going to go forward with that elementary school project, then that kind of will get priority to move on through. In the meantime, the school department and the municipal departments have decided to work together to come up with a master plan of the major capital improvement facilities needs in the community, and try and figure out a phasing of those plans going forward. So that'll, the thinking is, see where the school is. If the school's not going to go forward this year, then maybe in the spring we get an appropriation to do some more planning for the municipal facilities. And then the school will have a decision to make whether or not to continue to pursue the elementary school facility that we're looking to improve.
Thanks. And Chief, we've all started new jobs, and every time you start a new job, when you have an interview, you think you kind of understand it, but then there's surprises when you come in. Any surprises to you, or is it pretty much what you expected? Or?
There really has not been very many surprises for me at all. Being in the fire service for over 25 years, I've experienced a lot of the stuff I've come across in Westwood so far. So the transition was really well done with Chief Scoble. I worked with him for 2 weeks prior to coming on, a lot of that information sharing. So now it's just getting accustomed to how we do business here in Westwood, which is a little bit different than I've done it in the past, but nothing that we can't work through. So as of right now, no surprises, but that doesn't mean we won't have plenty, because that's what our industry is all about, is, we deal with surprises, and we and we react to it, and hopefully we're proactive. I mean, that's my goal, is to anticipate what the community needs and try to avoid, so we don't have those issues. That's where training and knowledge, skills, and ability of the staff that works with me is very important. So for me, training is extremely important. So that's where one of my big emphasis is, in training and networking and having those answers before there's a problem. So, and working through that through tabletops and those types of things. So those are the types of things you'll see my interest peak, in working to your question, Tom, is working together to deal with those major incidences that we have seen in other communities, those active shooters and all that kind of stuff. The Chief and I have been talking about that. The problem, again, with that type of training is it's extremely expensive. I recently just read an article about an agency that was doing, it was $38,000 to do 60 firefighters and 60 police officers in a community. So that's a lot of money invested in that what if scenario. So we have to work together to figure out how we can make that work for this community, whether it's going to be, we're going to work in our own community, or we're going to try to broaden that. And because I would assume, Chief, that we're not going to handle that incident with the 3, 4, 5 police officers on road that day. It's going to be a lot bigger event. So regionally, we have to start to work together with ourselves, my regional partners in fire, and the Chief's regional partners in police, and get together and pull that together for all of us.
Okay. So you've really kind of started to answer the next question. It was going to be my last question about priorities that you have, and you've talked about training. Mm-hmm. Anything else that you want to discuss associated with your own priorities?
No, I mean, the big priorities is to continue on the path we are on right now. We have an excellent, Chief Scoble did a great job of getting an apparatus replacement plan in play. We've put one truck into service. The other truck is here, but we sent it back to the manufacturer to make some modifications. That it didn't come in just correct, so we sent it back. That will be on the line shortly, and then we'll take the 2 pieces, or the last of the 2 pieces, and put it into a reserve status, and get another 12 years out of it in the reserve status, and keep our replacements working on that cycle. So we're going to invest a little bit in that reserve piece to make sure we get 12 years, or maybe if we have to, 14 years or 15 years. But by making that minor investment now, we'll get more longevity out of it in the future. So that's that proactive approach that I talked about that we really have to be watching and keeping on the back of our minds.
That's really what I had. I don't know if anybody else has more questions.
I'm sure folks.
Could I
Yeah,
just say
Mike,
one
please.
thing with regard to fire? I just want to give a shout out to Chief Scoble. I think John will agree immensely, as can be expected. Bill really did a wonderful job, dug right in for 14 days or so, was there with John, showing him what he could in the transition, making it as smooth as possible. Is still available to John when he needs him or wants to consult with him. He's making himself available. So I couldn't let it pass that we don't acknowledge what he's meant
Absolutely.
to this transition.
Thank you, Mike. I think that point is really well taken. And I just wanted to add that, Chief Scoble has come to so many of our meetings in the past and has been so willing to help us understand and work with us. So we've really appreciated that relationship and look forward to working with you in the same way.
Feelings mutual.
I'm sure folks have questions. Chris?
Yeah, talking about the increase in fire and police calls down at University Station, Mike, you might be best able to answer this. Has it risen to the point to rediscuss possible additional municipal buildings down there with the developer? Or has that been off the table for a while now?
Yeah,
Because I know it was kind of a placeholder discussion point when the university started. We'll see where we are.
Yeah, and it remains a placeholder. I mean, we're still in the build-out phase. So just to update everybody about what's going on, it was mentioned that the hotel just recently opened up last week or the week before. The Brigham and Women's facility is building out its first phase, its first half of its development. We just today received the plans to the planning board, submission for 100 condominiums that are going to go into that far corner on the right-hand side, just across from the assisted living facility. There's still another commercial building for the front yet to go. The restaurant is still on target for a February opening on the other corner near the train station. So down below that's building out. There are some pads up on top of the hill for office buildings. We hope that will be built out, and that would be the next phase of construction as well. There are some vacancies that have entered into the retail, but they've been filled up. There now is HomeSense, another TJX, Marshall, Home Goods type of store. It's if you've not been in it, it's more toward the furnishing and the rugs and things like that than Home Goods is. So it's kind of on that a little bit further along that continuum. And there are a couple of other smaller establishments that have gone under. Noodles and More, I think, is now going to be Pandora Chinese. It's a quick Chinese food place. There's nobody for the restaurant yet that closed up, Bonefish. That remains closed. And they're not marketing that internally, that Bonefish owns it or the people that own Bonefish own that building, and so they're looking for tenants, but they've not yet found one. So everything's going along fairly smoothly and progressing sort of on a steady pace, I think. We're really hoping to break ground on some office development. That's really what we'd like to see. They've had some discussions with an office user for the lower section for that other corner. We remain hopeful, but we haven't heard anything positive yet.
I was wondering, for this Chief Silva, is Brigham and Women's having their own security there, or are we going to be responsible for all the security for that facility?
It's my understanding they're going to have some security there, but that role is really very limited. They don't. That's really kind of more of keep the peace right at the moment, try to de-escalate a situation before it becomes more of a problem. But if somebody wants to file a complaint, they don't have the legal authority to take it, and they don't. They're not going to be special police officers, so they have no arrest powers. So if someone needed to be arrested, that would be us. So yes, it's my understanding they'll have something, but it won't really be much of a
So
help.
you're anticipating probably more calls related to that?
Oh yeah, most certainly. Well, and particularly at residential units. I mean, more people is just more calls for
And the
service.
hotel.
For sure, for sure.
So even though it might have leveled off with the apartments and some of the alarms and all that going on,
Yeah.
it's going to go up again.
I think so. I think this is just a temporary plateau. It's bound to go up. I mean, it would be anomalous if it didn't. So I would expect kind of a pro rata increase, just like we did when we saw the Gables. It's smaller than the Gables, but in some of the development in phase 1, we'll call this phase 2.
Yeah.
I think we'll see an in-kind increase as a result of it, and we're just kind of waiting to see. We're not in the dark like we were the first time. I think we have a little more, real data to go on. But
First of all, Chief Silva, thank you for the tour. A
oh,
couple
you
weeks
bet.
ago.
Yeah.
Your
It's my pleasure.
enthusiasm and pride in the new station was very evident. So thank you for that.
Thanks.
I'm curious whether the opioid epidemic that's so much in the news, how much that has touched Westwood.
Well, that's very real. I mean, that's mental health and opioids are often related. Just whether it's someone trying to self-medicate or whether it's someone who's really just kind of lost their way, and it starts off with the pills and opioids, and then it causes depression, and then kind of brings out some more latent mental health issues. So there's certainly a nexus between the two, but it's affected us, and it's affected a lot of suburban communities in some ways in a much more insidious manner, because in towns like ours you have huge population of well-funded parents, health insurance, high aspirations, and so when they have sons or daughters that start to be affected by this, and they all are. I mean, this is not. This is, as we all know, this doesn't pick a race or anything. It just affects everybody across the board. We see more of what they refer to as the social shaming, or the ability to maybe try to manage that, what they think maybe within their own health insurance plan, or they don't want to involve the police. Oh, gee, what would the neighbors think? What would the police department think? And sometimes, families just don't really understand the depth of the problem. It's because these are not people that are violent criminals. These are good people. These are loving families. These are people that just develop an addiction, and so then they're going to school and they're doing well in school. So it's not that stereotypical, person on a street corner that you think is going to break into to your house at night to fuel their drug habit. These are people that maybe start out with a pill that's in a medicine cabinet because they got hurt playing sports or something. So it's affected us, and in some ways communities like ours it's worse because it doesn't come to our attention right away. We've tried to make I think a proactive outreach. We started a community crisis intervention team. Mike's a part of it. It's a multidisciplinary group with representation from the fire department and other town agencies, youth and family services, where we try to tap into our various demographics, the school department, and get referrals, get information out to people, follow up on calls. If it's a medical call that we may not deal with too much, but the fire department does, the deputy chief has been the liaison for that. But they can reach out that way. If we get a call that's related to a crime and we think there's something underlying, we try to deal with that. So it certainly has affected us, but we anticipated that, I think, and as much as you can, we certainly put a lot of effort into trying to do. We're always more work you can do, but it's something we spend a fair amount of time on. It's something that's near and dear, certainly to my heart. Mike, he was Chief Scoble when he was here. Chief Decker is the deputy chief, so. But certainly it's affected us.
Do our officers carry Narcan?
We do. So we carried it right away. The very first day that we carried Narcan, we had I was there as a fluke. I was just driving one way, another police officer driving another way. That's why we all carry it, right? Because you just, you can't anticipate who's going to need it and when. And we had a save right on 109, so. Yeah, of course.
I just add, with respect to that, what we learned as we were going through the crisis is that Narcan will save them. They'll bring them to the hospital. The hospital will evaluate them. Within an hour, that person's back wherever they came from. Okay, they're not being. There's not much more treatment. What the sheriff's office started and what we participate in now is an actual visit to the home within a few days of the release from the hospital to present to the person who's addicted and the family members and anyone else in the household information about treatment, about where they can turn to help them find a way out of this. So that not a return situation. There are several instances, and I know of one personal, where, the person is Narcaned back to life 2, 3, 4 times, only to not live the 5th, 6th time that they have the event. And so the real effort is being made now to say, okay, we got them to a point where where they've been saved. Can we help them get to the next level of where they're treated, where they're seeking help? And there are a lot of families of people in their 20s that are struggling out there. It's parents struggling with, what do I do with my child? How do I deal with this situation? Where can I turn to for help? It's kind of a lost feeling. The kid goes up to bed every night and the parent worries, will they be there tomorrow? Those sorts of things. And it's only through proactive interaction with these families that we're going to be able to help them identify where the sources of treatment are. This is and those families feel isolated. When you got your kids and you're in the school system, there's a lot of, but as soon as your kids go off to college or get in a different age group and they're still living with you, it's a whole different thing. The connections are not there anymore, and the people to help you or to talk to are not there anymore.
Mike, are the treatment, everything, we read a lot of articles about the dearth of treatment facilities being available. If you find, if you, on that visit to the family, whatever the police and fire do, are there beds available if they're needed, or treatment facilities available?
Well, I'm not as aware of how that all works or what is available, but I think there's an increasing number of facilities that are becoming and being made available.
That's one of the things almost the Globe has an article almost every other day on the dearth of proper treatment facilities. So you guys are on the front line doing all the interventions, but you sort of wonder, and the parent asks you, where do you go? I'm not sure we have the answers.
Well, they're given a list of people that they can consult with that can help them then get to treatment facilities, whether it's a Suboxone treatment facility or methadone, or to a facility bed and things like that.
I wanted to ask a question about the emergency preparedness. Someone mentioned active shooter situation, a really serious event. And Chief, I think you mentioned the training or a training that had been looked at. And, so I guess this question is for both of you in terms of, how would you, characterize our level of preparedness, and what more would you like to do in order to be prepared for, God forbid, a horrible situation in town?
So a few things. I think I don't know any chief that would ever be comfortable saying, I think we have plenty of training for that, because it's just, that's the type of call that no matter how much training you have, you can never have enough. There's a lot going on. It's a highly emotional call. It often, schools tend to be a common location for these types of things. So it's there's a lot of just kind of human element with those types of calls. Some of the things we've done where we've been, kind of where we are, where we're going, where we've been from the police department. When I got here, one of the early things I did was get us back involved with the regional partnerships, Metrolec, the Metropolitan Boston Law Enforcement Council, just asset sharing from different police officers, a tactical team, for example, SWAT officer, a very, very expensive to staff a SWAT team and to get training. It's beyond the scope of the budget of just about every community. But if Westwood has one, and Medfield has one, and Foxborough has two, you can then put together a regional SWAT team that trains together, can respond to these instances in and throughout the community. We all work in one another's community or go to court in one another's community, and that becomes what we call in the industry a force multiplier. So one of the first things I did was get involved with Metrolec. We have a SWAT officer here in Westwood that's part of the regional team. And so he has an enhanced level of training for himself while he's here just on patrol in town on shift. He's also a firearms instructor. So what we're doing is we're modifying our internal training program so he can take some of that very high level knowledge and try to bring that down to a user level, if you will, so we can increase the basic level of training for all our officers. And then recently, just this summer, we sent every officer to an active shooting training class. That's very challenging to do because, as the chief mentioned, it's very expensive. So if if you're the police department and I want to send you all to training, that's great, but how do I do it? Because who's going to work the street? So I have to break you up in groups so that I can take you on your work day off and then have somebody come in overtime and fill your shift. And how do you fund that? So I've been waiting for a program. They travel throughout the country that comes, and you can get reimbursement up to a certain amount of money, and so they came to town, and so I was able to send the entire police department to this training. One, it's a first-rate training. Two, they did it on a college campus, Wheaton College, so it gave it a little more practical application. Three, we got reimbursement for it, and four, you gave everybody the same level of instruction, the same type of tactics, because there's a few different tactics to do it, and the other area departments did it too. The chiefs got together and said, okay, let's all, basically participate into this. So that was great. It's better than what we had, but there's also a real need to do joint training, and that's very costly. So
With fire?
Yeah, because they're, if you think about an active shooter with a gun, okay, well, of course they're going to call the police department, but the assumption is that somebody is going to get hurt. We don't want to think that, but that's why they're there with a gun. And the level of training that police officers have is, it's entry level, right? Our paramedics, our paramedicine comes from the fire department. And so, although we work great together, we had a great relationship with Chief Scoble. We have a great relationship already. Unfortunately, we had a few occasions right when Chief Deckers first got here to work together, and that relationship continued. But we need to make sure that we're doing everything we need to do so that we're not in their way, that we're making the situation better, not worse, and vice versa. And we want to work together on that. So we've had lots of conversations about how we could do that. Could we do it in small groups? Tabletop type exercises. So it's we're never going to get enough training. I mean, Bill Gates could move to Westwood and say, just go to any training you want, any time. Excuse me. And we just won't. You'll never get enough training. But we have made some strides on the police side. We haven't really done any joint active shooter training with the fire department. I would say that's, from my perspective, that's what I see as the next natural evolution for us, is to try to do some interactive training. And it may take the first phase of that, maybe like a tabletop exercise, because that's easier to do than an actual, real deployment of taking huge numbers of people off the road for both police and fire service and put them into a location. It's tricky, right? I mean, if we're going to use a school, when are you going to do it? The time of year, the schools are busy. There's a lot of moving parts there. But that's some of the conversations that the chief and I have had, and he can augment that, but that's kind of where we were, where we've been, and where I think we're headed.
So basically, to support part of what the chief was pointing out, is they have a foundation in the tactical side of dealing with the issue, where we're going to have to deal with the fallout and the damage that has occurred. So what will have to happen first is going to be a higher level almost like a balcony view of a scenario so that we can develop policy around it. So that there's no point in us training where they're going to do their thing and then we're standing back and trying to figure out what to do. We have to figure out, okay, how are we going to act? How are we going to bring people into the scene? Is the scene secure? Because, of course, we don't want to put our paramedics in a position to get hurt, even though that is a real potential in these scenarios. So that's a high-level planning event that's going to have to occur first. Once we develop that and the policy on how we'll relate with each other at these incidents, then we can run it down to actual practice scenarios where we can get in my past life in another community, we actually had the kids involved at a school on a Saturday. They dressed up as victims and did all that and understood, the scenarios and how to protect in place. And so it was a much bigger process. And you really got everybody in the community thinking about it. And it was a really good program. And, the police and fire worked really well together. And that's what I see with Chief Silva, that we're going to work in that direction.
Is the type of joint training that Chief Silva talked about, is that something that you would consider a priority of some sort as well?
When I first came to town, Chief Silva and I got together, and one of the things, not just that scenario, but we truly believe, both of us, that we need to have a public safety mindset, which means that we work together. So that's a high priority for both of us. So joint training in almost everything we do is we're going to start to look at that. Again, we've talked about it, and there is cost that comes with that, and we just have to be mindful of that as we start to move forward. And how can we do it that is going to best meet the needs of the community, at the same time prepare us for those worst case scenarios that we might come across. So yes, that is on our agenda to do, and we have to work it into our plans. And I know the rubber meets the road folks that work with me all want to do it. So they're on board, they want to get together, and they work great in the street together now. It's just going to solidify that relationship as we move forward.
And if you'll just allow me one more follow-up, and excuse my ignorance. I realize that you folks, your departments, are constantly working together and will do so on these kinds of issues, but is the kind of joint training that you're talking about, this expensive kind of training where you bring both departments together, are you thinking that's sort of a, kind of a one-time thing that, I'm not saying we'll fully prepare you, because as you said, you can never be fully prepared, but, is sort of a one-time cost, if you will, in a year or a 2-year cycle, that you think would bring great benefit to the departments and the town? Am I oversimplifying it?
I think we need to do really more research, because I really need, because again, at only 40 some odd days, I need to do a full evaluation of the community risk for myself. So I understand that the chief's community risk is a little different than mine. So I have to get through all of that before I can really prioritize where I feel the biggest bang for our buck is going to be. That's why I'm not prepared to talk numbers on budgets or anything like that tonight, because I'm still in that phase of community risk reduction. So it's a much bigger picture, because it's everything from EMS to people falling to visits in the home to all of that. There's a lot that can be done, but we have to look at that as a community and what's going to work best for Westwood. So that's where I am right now, in that really beginning stages in my first 100 days of really doing a full-blown analysis of the community, and really to see where that we're going to best fit that training. And like I said, I think for the active shooter concept that was brought up earlier, that's a high-level conversation between the command staff that works with me and the chief's command staff to see how we're going to play together. Then once we figure out how we play together, then we actually practice out. So we got to build the playbook, like if we were a football team, then we go practice the plays. Mm-hmm. So we have to do that first and move in that direction. That does not have a huge cost to it. Right. Because Jeff and I can get together and bang it out and, bring our on-duty staff with us, no big cost. It's when you start doing this scenario-based training where you're bringing folks in on overtime to cover shifts or bringing people in for overtime on their days off, coordinating all those types of schedules. That's really where the cost starts to come in. So I wouldn't say that we would come to you right away with a, hey, we need to have $38,000 to do active shooter training. That would be a mistake for us to ask you for that.
Too much foundational work we need to do before we get there. One thing we've already started to talk about, we talked about it with Mike and Pam, and we kind of partially got forced in this direction with the new station project is the radio communication infrastructure. And that's a very big deal. It's something that you almost take for granted, but the interoperability between departments and between surrounding departments is critical. University Station, again, kind of raises this issue because of the topography of the town. We're dealing with radio frequencies. It's very much affected by trees and buildings and lines of sight. And our radio infrastructure is, well, it's not aging, it's old. And so we're on an old technology for that. When we went into the new building, we ran into a problem where we were expecting a line, a copper cable basically running from the police station down to Eversource to allow us to get a repeater there, right? It bounces signal around the town. And that wasn't installed because essentially Verizon and nobody, they really don't want to be in that business. They provide it for public safety, but there's almost universal cognizance that in a few years, whatever that means, is it 3 years, is it 6 years, we don't know, but everybody's saying, well, we're just going to get out of the copper wire business. So the old police station is still there because a critical component of the radio system is connected by an existing copper cable down to Eversource, and to knock down that building means you lose the link down to Eversource. So, you know, we told Verizon, well, look, we need this line, like it should have been installed, it wasn't. How long is it going to take you? And, you know, I don't know.
Between 2 and 4.
Right, right. Yeah, we said, yeah, is that weeks, is that months, what is it? You know, it's somewhat cavalier with that. And so microwave is a better solution, a little bit more money on the front end, but there's no monthly rental fees, what you're paying on those copper lines. It's got about an 18-month payoff. Part of our system now is like first generation microwave from the station to Fox Hill. We're in the process of trying to get modern day microwave from us over to Eversource because it's, you know, a licensed bandwidth. It's not, you know, if the lines get wet, it doesn't go down. You know, what that means for the person who doesn't deal with that is that when that link, not if it goes down, when it goes down, where the officers are down at University Station or the firefighters are inside the gables and they're trying to talk on their, you know, their portable radios, you can't hear them. You can't hear them. That's a real problem. I mean, if there's a fire, or if the officers are fighting with somebody, not good. So, you know, we're working piece by piece to improve the radio infrastructure, and you know, this will be more conversations that Chief Scoble and I kind of started it with Mike and Pam, and now Chief Deckers. You know, we're talking about radio infrastructure improvements. How do we do it? Which way do we go with it? You know, there's different links, you know, in the system on how to do that, right? And you know, phase 2 development, that's one of the things we're working with, you know, Nora and Mike, we're talking about with them. By building code, these buildings are required to put in what they call BDAs, bi-directional amplifiers. They get the radio signal, you know, out from inside the building to a radio tower to repeat the signal back. They're quite expensive. And so what some communities did, I know Warrant Crossing did this, I think Derby Street did this, is they said, look, rather than put in these bidirectional amplifiers at a cost of whatever it is, we want you instead to improve the radio infrastructure with these microwave links. It will be less money for you, and it's a much better result, not only for the protection of your buildings, but also the town. Much better for the town because it increases the radio signal for the whole area. So right now our radio coverage is, when it's all working, is okay. It's not great, it's not foolproof, but it's okay. The problem is with copper wires, it's almost never always all working. something, one part of it will go down or not. So that's something we're looking to do, and that has a very real tie into everything, whether it's an active shooter or a community event or a heart attack. I mean, if your loved one's having a heart attack, that's the most important call in the world to you and to us too. And if we need more officers and more paramedics and more things, and we can't communicate, that's a problem. So that's something we're talking about now. Part of it is one link of it is part of the new building project, which we're taking care of, but that's something that maybe we'll learn more about in the future. We'll see. We definitely need to improve. It's just a matter of when.
Tom?
Yeah, I had one other public safety concern question regarding mobile phones and hands-free. Any thoughts on Weston becoming a hands-free community, or what's your opinion on mobile phones?
It seems like the state is kind of postured to preempt that and make Massachusetts, at least from the sentiment we're hearing lately, to make Massachusetts a hands-free mobile community. I know that there was some talk about that in the legislature. The governor initially some months ago indicated that he wasn't in favor of that, but then recently he was very publicly said no, he was in favor of that. Distracted driving is a problem. There's no question about it, and it's an exceedingly difficult law to enforce as is. I mean, it was a lot of noise when the no texting and driving law first came out, but it was virtually unenforceable because there was nothing stopping you from taking out your phone and dialing a number or typing in mom so her number popped up, and it may look like you're texting, but you're not. You're using the phone book. So I think we've slowly started to move in that direction, and as of late, it seems like we're headed in that direction statewide. Personally, I think it's a good idea. I think there's people are just distracted naturally in their life alone. They have husbands, wives, children, jobs, meetings. So it's, you're daydreaming, or many times you'll be on the road and you'll say, wait, how did I get 2 exits? I thought I was on exit 9. I'm on exit 11 now. I think it's happened to everybody in their lifetime before. So you add a cell phone to the mix or handheld device. It's a problem, no question. It certainly would make it a lot easier to enforce. I mean, I think getting rid of them would be a great step, and at the same time having something that's easy to enforce. I mean, it's simple enough. If you can't have it in your hand and it's in your hand, then you can enforce it. And it's really about saving people, not so much writing the ticket. I mean, just pulling somebody over, I think. I don't think anybody who's out there on their phone is doing it because they're looking to hurt somebody. I think they're just such an ingrained part of our life. Your phone goes off, you pick it up, you try to answer it. So, I think it's like all the enforcement actions we take, really, it's about education and safety rather than kind of a punitive enforcement action. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just back to technology, you made me think there for a second, and the question is to both chiefs. Technology is changing every day for the better, and we would think in a way that's, we can adapt and use it in a way maybe to save money for the town at some point, or however it works. But how prepared are both of you from a staff standpoint in incorporating the changes in technology that are occurring?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. So that's Mike and I had a little talk about this, and Pam, really by unintentionally, we have an employee who, I mean, I think everybody knows, but in the interest of it's a public meeting, I'll try to keep it generic. This employee is a police employee, but he has a particularly significant training and aptitude in technology to the point that he does a lot of the things that Donna and her staff and townwide IT would do, and some things they just don't know how to do at all because he's so talented at it. They kind of say, okay, well, you take care of it, and he does that. He unexpectedly got sick, and everybody was kind of left saying, well, okay, well, how do we do this? And it was one of those things, if you have that, everybody has that person who does things, and then when that person isn't there, you realize, well, I didn't realize they did that too. And so, we were in a real pickle. The trend, just because it's such a fast-moving technology, and he's an anomaly, is it's unrealistic to expect that you would get a police officer or a firefighter to have that level of aptitude and training and current training in an industry that's so dynamic, it's changing like this. So, Mike and I talked a little. I talked with Pam because we didn't know what was going to happen with this employee. I mean, it was acute and significant. Thank God he came back. But, he could essentially retire at almost any time. So we had some, Donna and her staff were great. I mean, they stepped up and they, had a pretty sharp learning curve with some things, other things with no problem. We had to talk about, look, we really need to look at having a public safety IT person, which is kind of the model. It's kind of the best practice. I mean, Cambridge does it. A lot of places do it. The places that don't do that tend to try to rely on their kind of their municipal IT people, but it's public safety IT is its own breed of cat. There are the computers that we use either need, special clearances or securities for medical transmission or police criminal record transmission. And so, it's just not the same thing. So you need somebody who has kind of that, we'll call it generic level of IT experience, but it's also a specialist. So we got some help. Actually, speaking of Cambridge, we got some help from an employee of Cambridge who had a connection to the town, which was great. And we're very fortunate to just have that connection through a town employee who had a relative that was the IT specialist for Cambridge Public Safety, and now I believe is the supervisor for Cambridge Municipal. I moved over to the municipal side, but that's a position that if this person retires, certainly Mike and Pam and the chief and I and Donna and IT would have to have that conversation. How do we want to handle this? How does that person want to report to Donna but be assigned just to public safety IT? I mean, there's plenty of work there. This one employee of mine runs back and forth between both departments all the time. So there's a very real need for that. So I think we're just, all glad that person is still here, but aware of the fact that that's probably the direction we need to go.
Yeah, particularly given that technology should make things more efficient.
Right.
And not to be prepared or not to be in a position to take advantage of that, is a loss. So, something to think about.
That's it's spot on.
I have another question for you, Chief Deckers, and I want to give you a little preface to the question. I'm sure that you're up to date on our town government structure here in Westwood, and that the FinCom is an appointed body that is asked to advise the town on all matters before it on the warrant. And in the spring, of course, one of the largest items is the budget. And in order to do that work, we have subcommittees that really drill down on certain areas in town: education, zoning and planning, long-range planning, and municipal, of course. And Julie Bride is chairing that subcommittee for us. And I understand that Peter Lentz is going to be the liaison with the fire department, and Tom will be the liaison for the police department. And that is a very, very active committee that really tries to look really hard at what the needs are, and are we meeting those needs. And as I said to you before, we as a body have been very active with looking at the levels of fire service over the years. Particularly, Mike remembers we had a lot of discussions about staffing, especially as University Station was coming online and so forth. So all of that is a preface to my question, which is a number of years ago when I served on the municipal committee and was over at the Firehouse 1, I can remember Chief Scoble pointing out a number of deficiencies in Station 1. And I realize you're only on your 35th day, but one thing that I know our subcommittee will be drilling down on is, what is the extent of that now, and how, if at all, are those deficiencies impacting performance of the fire department? And I don't know if you have a sense of that now, and I'm sure you'll develop it further.
I can tell you that the Municipal Facilities Task Force is in the process of evaluating all of the buildings. And just like Town Hall is on that same one in the fire station and other buildings. They're all being looked at. So right now, I'm actually waiting because they're supposed to make a visit to Station 1 to do the full facilities audit before I interject, my own personal opinions of what it is. I can't tell you if it's impacting or not impacting at the 40-day level because I watch how well and, our guys have done a great job of being able to take whatever shortcomings might come their way that day and deal with it. So until we really look at the big picture, I would hate to come before this board and tell you, yes, my stations need, top priority, because that wouldn't be fair. Until I really get a full understanding of what's going on in town, to your point of understanding, the way you do business. I had my first meeting with Pam this morning at 9:30 to figure out how we do the budgets and all of that. So I don't want to speak out of school and just give you a knee-jerk reaction to what I see. But I can tell you it is on my radar to look at it. And whatever adjustments that we need to make sure we have a building that can serve the community will take into place until we can replace it.
Perfectly fair answer. Thank you.
Okay?
Do we have any other questions for the chiefs or Mike? Well, Tom and Peter, thank you very much for leading this discussion. Thank you all, Chief Silva, Chief Deckers, Mike Gillette, thank you very much. This was a great discussion. We wish you happy and healthy holidays. Thank you, and we'll see you after the first of the year. Thank you very much. Well, I want to thank you, Tom and Peter. That was great. That was a really good discussion. It's really a luxury to be able to hunker down when we're not so time pressed with the healthy warrant in front of us. I don't have a whole lot else to talk about tonight. I did just want to remind folks of which subcommittee you're on. If you were not aware, the list is in front of you, and I know that work is going to begin in earnest. Tom and Peter know which subcommittee they're on. And I know you all do too. I want to thank all of you for the work you're taking on, especially the additional task force assignments as well. George, Mike, Barb, and Chris, who are doing that. And just wanted to remind you of our schedule for next year, 2018. It's around the corner. As you will see, the town meeting is on May 7th, and I say the schedule for you folks as much as for people who may be watching at home, because we clearly have no audience here tonight. So our schedule is, as of right now, to meet on January 9th, and then to hear from article sponsors on January 22nd, going into a second night if necessary on the 23rd. We then have on February 6th the municipal and school budget presentations. And then March is our busiest month of the year. We will have our first public hearing on March 5th, going into a second night if necessary on the 6th. On March 13th, we will have the FinCom subcommittee reports. And then on March 26th, we'll have our final public hearing, going into a second night if necessary. And just to remind you folks, particularly for Howard, who's new with us, it would be the same procedure as last time. Mike O'Hara had what I thought was a fabulous suggestion. I wanted to raise it with you folks, which is when we get to that final public hearing and we know we're going to be late, that we may want to start earlier than 7:30, whether it be 6:30 or 7. We know it's going to be a late night or maybe 2 late nights. So if we can talk about Neil Scott more maybe in January, but just be thinking about that. I know 7:30 works. A lot of us are working and commuting and have other responsibilities, but I think people would rather start at 6:30 than be there at 12:30. So something to think about. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that the warrant opened last night, and it will close on January 8th. We, per our schedule, are scheduled to meet on January 9th. I'm told that Pam is not going to be with us for that meeting, January 9th. I'm questioning at this point whether we really have much to talk about at that meeting, and I wanted to raise that. I mean, we do sometimes spend a meeting with what little precious free time we have as a body, kind of drilling down on things like we had the opportunity to do tonight, which was just terrific. I don't know if folks have any thoughts about something in particular they think we should discuss at that January 9th meeting.
Well, a lot of the articles that come up aren't necessarily Pam articles, they're the selectmen's articles or planning board. So maybe we play it by ear and see what is on that coming up
That's a
from.
good idea.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
Is Pam's can be pretty straightforward.
Right.
You know, we've seen them all before, really.
So I think we keep the meeting on, we see what percolates. If it sounds like neither the planning board nor the selectmen have much to talk to us about, we may well cancel that meeting. We'll certainly make up for it with the other meetings and the work we'll have to do. But I think that's the right approach. Just let's take a wait and see. I have no idea. I've heard nothing at this point. George tells me that the Islington
Meetings are,
Task
yeah,
Force
Not till
is
it's heating up in January.
heating up in January, so there's nothing to report yet on that.
Pausing for the holidays.
Yeah. Any other old business? Any?
Just, I want to make two
George,
comments.
please.
One is something to think about, and that is, at town meeting, I think people turn towards FinCom to having evaluated a controversial issue and make a recommendation. I'm not sure how many people have read what we've written, and I think one of the things I'm starting to think about, maybe FinCom, the person who wrote the article, or most not, maybe need to get up and do some explanation. Because I think what happens is folks here have done a tremendous amount of work. People come in with a very particular opinion, and we really, I think, sometimes ought to get up and maybe even explaining the pros and cons of an article. But I think it's almost another elevation of FinCom's responsibility to town meeting, maybe to explain, especially when we know there's going to be a controversial issue, to explain the basis of our recommendation, rather than just assuming everybody's read it. Because I don't think, I'd be honest with you, I'm not sure how many people read it. And those who come in highly focused on an issue are weighted towards one side and really don't want to hear the other side. So I was just thinking it might help, especially if we stay with open town meeting, which is, you know, it's the essence of democracy, but, you know, you get 300 people out of 10,000 voters who can dramatically affect something the town may have to live with one way or the other. So I just think that maybe FinCom gets up and explains and people understand how much work we put in. The other comment I wanted to make, and I said this to Mary Ann, I truly think that if this freight train of tax reform goes through, I think the high property tax states like Massachusetts, I think it's going to create tremendous downward pressure on municipal budgets. And when you look at the demands we may have on the capital side and the demands on the operating side, I think there's going to be tremendous pressure to hold down budgets. The average taxpayer has lost a tremendous write-off with you know, state taxes and property taxes, and I just don't think the appetite's going to be there for people to continuously, on an ongoing basis, you know, seeing their taxes go up. Me, who's an advocate of all the programs I like to see in town, but I think it's a reality we're going to have to think about, because you know, people's inability to write off their state taxes, their local their property taxes is huge. And even the average home in Westwood pretty much hits that 10,000 very, very fast, and there's a huge number of homes above that, and people are going to say, hey, wait a minute, I can't afford to have this go up anymore. So I think it's, as the FinCom, something we got to start to think about and be aware of.
George? Yeah, Tom?
Yeah, Mary Ann, I'd tag on to what George said. George's first point, I think, is really right on the point in terms of possibly having someone from FinCom explain the FinCom stance on articles, because, at least on, like you said, George, maybe the ones that are somewhat controversial, maybe not the housekeeping stuff certainly, but because in my opinion, I think that a good chunk of the room at town meeting may not have understood fully, for example, the FMO UOD 6 and 7 article, with the language that was proposed in terms of setting a cap on residential dwelling units. I think people, and talking with some people, I think people maybe voted the other way, not realizing what their vote actually meant. And so it's easy to get confused with some of that stuff in terms of, we talked about indefinite postponement, and what does that mean? Does yes mean no, or no mean, et cetera. And so I think that further explanation in some cases might be helpful to folks at town meeting.
Let me
Oh, go ahead.
take it next step. We've had discussions as a group about the confusion that exists at town meeting. And I invite you all, if you haven't already, to go on the website of WestCat. And recently, they came out with gave a great description of what the FinCom does, and the whole purpose is behind that. Mike Gillette was interviewed, and I thought gave a very clear, much clearer, and should give the audience a clearer understanding of what actually takes place, how it all happens, what FinCom's responsibility is. And I think we should, moving forward, think about how we can get a wider viewing of that prior to a town meeting, because it'll avoid things like that. And there's no question there's confusion. The issue relative to our role at them, I don't disagree, George, but I think that's a moderator control. That's their responsibility as a town meeting, and I would think that we would reach out to her to get her sense of what
Oh,
that would
absolutely.
happen.
No. I'm just saying that it's almost taking the responsibility, the written, and then doing it verbally. And that's all I'm suggesting. And I clearly talked with the town moderator. I just think, if I had to get up and explain a controversial issue, I would like to say, this was what the FinCom did. This was the basis of an analysis. This is why we reached the issue, why we reached the decision we reached. So then, at least that's out there, and you don't have to so that,
Confusion, sure.
yeah, it may eliminate some of it.
But I think a lot of the issues about it are not understanding the underlying article, like Nora getting up and explaining, why this cap and where this cap came from. So ours is one element, but we have to be very careful about, making the case for whoever wrote the underlying article.
Agree, Howard?
Just a quick, I agree with George's first point, except I think it's only necessary when we vote indefinite postponement. That's where all the confusion comes
What does
from.
that mean?
So if we vote indefinite postponement, maybe we should get up and...
Well, yes or no, let me give you an example. Surprised me, the emotions over the sidewalk, but if somebody got up and FinCom said, look, we analyzed the issue, because I don't think what happened is the DPW had really reached out to these people, had held a whole bunch of hearings, and that almost got lost in the weeds. And if somebody got up and said, look, we looked at the issue, and based on the analysis done, and all we're asking for is a preliminary study, the FinCom reached the following conclusion, here's why. That's all I'm saying, because I think the average, unless it came out, it was almost by, Todd got up and was able to say at some point in time, geez, we've met with you a bunch of times. I think it would have been a lot more effective for that to come out up front.
But then I wouldn't feel comfortable on something like that. I kind of agree with Howard more on the indefinite postponement, because then you're kind of like, I voted one way on that, but that was that night, and I probably maybe could have been swayed another night to have voted another way on that. I'd question whether something like that. It's really when there's a real confusion, because people agree to disagree, and those people were never gonna, no matter what Todd had done, and no matter how we felt that they'd had meetings, they were never gonna agree with that. And so I think they were the best ones to speak on their behalf.
I mean, I think what happens, you have a lot of people come for one issue, and they're coming to vote for it or against it, and they're confronted with indefinite postponement, and they don't have a clue. as to what it is. So it's almost like you have to explain it every time. They're not going to read it. But
I think as a procedural matter, we don't have a right to speak at town meeting. We have to be recognized by the moderator, so it is the moderator's meeting. To that extent, if we, want to be recognized, we most likely would be. I guess I worry about our body looking partisan or like we are advocates. We make decisions as a
All I'm saying is to
joint body.
explain our recommendation. Let me put that to my point, just to explain why FinCom made the recommendation that it made.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think that people ask for that clarification when they need it. I don't think we need to offer it unless it's asked for. And it's typically asked for when there's a dissenting vote on FinCom, but I don't think for every indefinite postponement, we need to get up there and say, this is why we voted against this. And
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, Cindy. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer. I think it's a very good issue to raise, George, and I think we've tried as a body to get better and better at this, being prepared to have someone to stand up, when they ask for that dissenting vote. We didn't used to do that, and now we're more cognizant of that. We want people to be prepared to speak. I had to
Maybe
stand
just
up.
procedurally letting the moderator know that the FinCom is prepared to explain its recommendation on the article write-ups and in our own minds to say, hey, for those of us who wrote up or were involved in a particular item, be prepared to do it.
I
So
think
the
that's
moderator
right.
then knows, okay, FinCom not only did the write-up, but FinCom, if necessary, and the moderator wants to call upon them, FinCom is prepared to get up and explain it. And then the moderator has the discretion, knowing FinCom's ready to go if she feels or he feels it's necessary.
Cindy?
Is the confusion over indefinite postponement, you all have been involved in this for a lot longer than I have. Is this a relatively new phenomenon, or has this been something that through the ages people have been confused about?
yes, I can speak to that. That has been, as long as I've been coming to town meetings, that's been an issue. And I know we discussed it 15 years ago. And I don't. And town council was not prepared to discuss at the time what it would take to change it. It's not a simple thing
No.
to change.
And we broached that last year, right? You asked Tom, I believe, and.
Yeah, just this past fall.
Yeah,
Just this past fall.
right. Because I wonder, would some sort of warrant come up as a public petitioner saying, hey, should the finance committee be able to vote yes or no on something? And would that be thrown out by Tom, or could that be voted upon?
You'd have to change the charter.
Yeah, he probably would
Have to be a
come up
charter
with a
change.
reason why he couldn't.
Yeah.
And to your point, George, I also think, I'd love to know what you folks think about this. I wish that folks who went to town meeting were told a little more about FinCom, who we are and what we do and how we do it. And I'm not saying a dissertation, but just a few more sentences about what our process is. Because clearly, people made statements that, remember someone said, well, you folks were elected to do this, and I think I just said, we're appointed, so people don't understand, and it would be great.
I think maybe you could talk to, because that's how presentations are done. There's a discussion with the moderator, and perhaps, you could talk to the moderator and see if there's the opportunity to say something in the beginning about what our process was and what we've gone through, and, and.
I'll
Yeah.
do that. I'll talk to her. It's her meeting.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, she can,
I think it would be worthwhile just for people to get a little more information in person, not to read. I know it's in the book.
No, and you're right on, and last year was a pretty quiet year. The year prior, as you recall, we all got accused as a group and individually of, trying to block, I think it was the motion of the school budget, as I recall, and clearly people had no idea, what our role was, and that's pretty telling. And I go back, the public service announcement again, but, attempting to educate the town and the voters on different roles is, I think, something that's needed, particularly people new to town, people who are experiencing a town meeting for the first time and trying to get an understanding of what their responsibility is. So however we do that, however it can be done, I think it's beneficial.
And that was a case of somebody using everybody's ignorance about what we are to try to manipulate things his direction, so.
Yeah, that was.
I do agree, Mike. Westwood Media Center has been doing a great job. John Cummings has been threatening to interview me on his show, FinCom, and I have thus far
I think you
Well,
should.
there's your opportunity.
I went in without
Come on.
counsel, but,
Do you want to be interviewed by your?
No.
Don't want to be interviewed by my husband on TV.
you need some
But
representation before you go.
Yeah.
We'll ate the lasagna in the refrigerator last night.
I mean, the other fascinating thing going on, if you look at the demographics of who attends town meeting, never mind the folks who come for a particular issue, we are not getting the younger people who live in this town to even think about coming to town meeting. And that really concerns me in the sense that they live in a very different world. They're very, very busy, they're very engaged, but it's a world of instant communications. And they're just not going to come and sit through a 3 or 4 hour town meeting. And that, I sort of worry about that. How do you engage that community? And it's not the mom and dad who've got, 2 kids. You're always going to have that disruption, but there are a lot of people who could come, but just aren't going to be engaged enough to come.
Unless there's a hot button issue
Yeah.
that brings them in.
And that's part of the argument for the electronic voting, and never mind what occurred. What they find is that really hasn't changed. It doesn't change who comes to the town meeting. But every town, if you read the articles on what different towns are trying to do, they're all trying to get a different demographic in. They're providing babysitting. Some town meetings go on for several nights. They're trying all sorts of doing it on Saturdays, and, nobody's solved the problem yet. Have
Any
something
other-
on the schools every time, and then they'll come.
Any other business folks? Well, again, I want to thank Tom and Peter for leading tonight's discussion. That was great. Thank you for that preparation. That was really terrific. I want to wish everybody a very happy and healthy holiday season.
Absolutely.
And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thanks,
Can I just
everybody.
ask one question? Do you have the date yet for when we have to get our write-ups in to Jane?
It's usually the Friday after that last public hearing, so 26, 27, probably the
Sunday.
30th.
now?
Okay, what about I'm
I'm just
I have a
kidding.
subcommittee. The subcommittee is due the end of, okay.
That's March 13th.
So that's usually due,
Wasted dollars.
Yeah, so March 30th for write-ups.
Staying on top of things.